everyone. Thank you for joining us. It's always difficult to get a consensus among economists on all issues. And it is especially hard when it comes to tariffs, the pros, the cons, the implication. The year ahead is clouded by the prospects of tariffs and policies which may derail trade flows. President Trump is committed to tariffs. He says it's a way to generate revenue, a way to address trade imbalances, even to bring back manufacturing back home. The thing is, there are also risks. Inflation, and also the risk of retaliation. So what does that mean for the global economy, for consumers, for businesses? Well, this town hall hopes to be interactive. We hope for it to generate robust conversation. Every seat in the room today is a hot seat, so you may be called upon. We do encourage participation. And if you would like to speak, do raise your hand. A microphone will be headed your way. You do not have to agree. You can disagree. You can come up with a new idea. Let's make it as interactive as possible. It's my privilege to introduce to you the speakers today. Valdis Dombrovskis, Commissioner of Economy and Productivity, Implementation and Simplification of the European Commission. Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, Director General of the World Trade Organization. She's also a member of Board of Trustees of the World Economic Forum. Let's get it started. And of course, we're joined online by participants as well. And for those of you joining us online, there's a QR code. Please do use that QR code if you want to submit any questions. So I want to start the ball rolling by having a polling question. Someone snigger. Are tariffs necessary in today's economy to boost domestic production? That is the basis of Trump's argument, of course. And when we talk about in today's environment, a pragmatic environment, and also a challenging environment where increasingly we're seeing more protectionist policies from economies. So are tariffs necessary in today's economy to boost domestic production? Only two choices. It's a yes or a no. And currently, no is winning, but of course there are those who say yes as well. Keep casting your vote, but as we wait for, I guess, all the answers to come in, Dr. Ngozi, if I can just call on you, what do you think?
First of all, thank you, Haslinda, and good morning, everyone. I just want to say, I know this debate is about tariffs, but I want to remind everyone that trade and the WTO is about much more than tariffs. The WTO is the home of agreements that could actually lead to other, let me say, adverse impacts on world trade, you know, if they are not adhered to and respected. We house the Sanitary and Phytosanitary Measures Agreement, which protects the safety of many of the foods and so on that we trade, the Technical Barriers to Trade Agreement, product standards, so that there's trust when you trade. So tariffs are important, but trade is not only about tariffs. I just wanted to put that. The second point I want to make is that please let's not hyperventilate. I know we're here to discuss tariffs. I've been saying to everybody, could we chill also? Because 80% of world trade right now, world goods trade, is taking place on WTO terms. And world trade is at a peak, $30.4 trillion, which is higher than the pre-pandemic peak. So there's resilience. Does that mean I'm not concerned about all? No, I'm not trying to say that. But I just sense a lot of hyperventilation, and we need to take a deep breath. So now, coming to the issue about what do I think about tariffs. You know, the issue about trade policy, including tariffs, is that they're what we call kind of stroke of the pen kind of policies. They are very easy to use. You can just sign or not sign on that. So they're used quite often to solve problems that are not trade, not the fault of trade. And trade is sometimes unfairly blamed for things that are not really resulting from trade. Like if you look at deficits, trade deficits, sometimes you see that the problem is not actually coming from trade, but from macroeconomic imbalances. Either there is too much, if two countries have a deficit vis-a-vis each other, it could be that one, domestic consumption needs to be spurred, it's not adequate. And the other, maybe there's no savings, everybody is consuming too much. So I'm just speaking in very simple terms. You know, so there's savings, consumption imbalances that need to be solved. And even if you use tariffs, they could do well temporarily to reduce the deficit. But I think ultimately, there are other issues that come, you know, they're inflationary, they can make the exchange rate appreciate, make your exports uncompetitive, and then you come back to the point where your deficits are rising again. So I think we need to, and it's not just me saying this, other institutions have done the work. We need to look at the fundamentals, the macroeconomic fundamentals, and work on those, as well as on trade issues. So that's one of the things that, and tariffs can be inflationary, as I just said. They can appreciate the exchange rate. So they have other consequences that we need to be very mindful of.
We'll pick up on the consequences slightly later. Commissioner.
Well, first of all, good morning, everyone. And indeed, about tariffs, it's not really yes and no question. As we know, economic reality is more nuanced, and I think Dr. Ngozi already sketched out some of this complexity. If I was to answer yes, no, I would go for no. And I think European Union itself is important lesson for that. Now, even if you look inside the European Union, our main economic achievement as European Union is EU single market, meaning that we do not have trade barriers between 27 EU member states. There is free movement of goods and services, as well as labor and capital. And there are countless studies showing that that serves European Union and each of EU member states very well. So removing trade barriers has helped Europe to prosper. And the same is true outside Europe. Those countries which are economically isolated already now are not countries which are the most prosperous. Actually, the opposite is true. Those are among the most, amongst the poorest countries. And also history does not have any good lessons in this regard. When there was last time some kind of fall towards protectionism and global economic fragmentation, which was in early 1930s. This was one of the factors contributing to the Great Recession. So therefore, we do not see protectionism as an answer for economic problems. But of course, when we are discussing international trade, it's very important that it's a fair trade, that it's based on a level playing field. And there are still, obviously, things to do.
Could we have our participants here weighing in on the issue, especially those who actually voted yes? Is there anyone in the room that trade could help boost domestic production? I mean, when we take a look at tariffs as well, the thing is, it's not a new tool. It is a blunt tool. It is not a new tool. It has been used before, and tariffs actually evolve. You talked about how it just is easy to sign it. It's also quite easy to reverse it. So are there arguments out there to say that it could be necessary initially, and then, you know, it could be reversed? What are your views on whether tariffs are necessary to boost domestic production? Please.
Well,
I'm sorry, could you just wait for the microphone, please?
No, sorry. Gary Brown from the U.S. I think it's initially, there's different reasons why you do tariffs. And the reasons that the U.S. or Trump administration is looking at doing them is some to balance playing fields, and two, it's leverage. I truly don't believe we're going to have tariffs against Mexico and Canada, maybe some, but they're trying to he's trying to use this, and people use it, other reasons that make more sense. It's not just a tariff. It's reasoning, it's leverage. That's all I can tell you, it's leverage. It's trying to get the balanced balanced field for your country, your domestic production, and just to try to get what you want across.
Leverage, negotiating tool, anything else?
Can I just say that that supports my point that we should not hyperventilate. We should take a deep breath.
But for Europe, which is at risk, for instance, even if it's not 25%, even if it's just 10%, it is painful, especially if it's industries like the auto industry.
First of all, I would take a bit broader look at this. EU and US are strategic allies. And especially in a current geopolitical situation, when we see that autocracies are challenging rules-based international order, it's very important that democracies work together, and so it is with this spirit of cooperation which we are approaching also now the new Trump administration. Second, EU-US trade and investment relationship is the largest in the world. Together we are 42% of the world GDP, so there is lots of stake also economically. Therefore, certainly we will be seeking engagement and a dialogue with the Trump administration and find a constructive way forward.
Can I just say that in terms of, this is supposed to be on the economics also, you know, tariffs can be distortionary internally. They can lead to misallocation of resources. You know, from one sector to the other. This may not be what is intended when they are put on, but this is why over time many countries have moved away from using tariffs, including, you know, the large countries in the economy and even emerging markets and developing countries. Most of those who use tariffs now are very small, either small countries or poor countries, that a few of them, a handful, raise their resources about 1/3 from tariffs. And the US last raised revenue, I think, between the 1860s and the 1920s. Now tariff revenue is like 2%. China is 2.5%. So it's really a tool because of some of the other consequences in terms of the way it affects internal allocation of resources, that there's been a move away. So I also believe that, bearing that in mind, if it is a negotiating tool, you know, let's take a deep breath and wait till that happens. If it's not really going to be used as an economic tool, I'm not saying that's not going to happen. I'm just saying let's see how it is used and the impact. But on a purely economic basis, it is distortionary, it can be inflationary. And these are some of the reasons. And it can work against your own exports by appreciating your exchange rate relative to that of others. That's why there's been a move away. There's a good reason why the world moved away from it, using it excessively.
Can it revive manufacturing? Can it bring manufacturing back to the US? Dr. Ming-Ju, perhaps you're in a way on that.
I mean...
Former PBOC, by the way.
Oh, thank you, and give me this wonderful opportunity. No, Chinese company will be more than happy to invest to reverse, you know, technology transfer in the United States. But currently has a ban, you know, the technology ban, capital ban, particularly on renewable energy, solar panels, EVs, batteries. I think a lot of this new environmental protection, carbon neutrality related companies would love to invest in the United States. Yeah, and so we hope both sides will be able to sit down to cut the deal. U.S. can open the door for Chinese investments. I think that will be wonderful. That will be good for both. Yeah.
Anyone else would like to weigh in? Can you just wait for the microphone? Could I have the microphone here, please?
Hi, Jan Willem, Ms. Philips, Medical Equipment. Some of the arguments that are being used for the tariffs are to restore national security. And I think for some of our sectors, like healthcare, we're not quite sure why we're a part of this game of tariffs. And in fact, in some sectors, there's a trade surplus from the United States to Europe. And suddenly we find ourselves, even though there's, from a European perspective, a deficit, subject to discussions about tariffs that don't make any sense. So could you maybe also elaborate about, so not only what is really at stake then if it's not tariffs and economic, is national security part of this discussion? And if so, then maybe a lot of our commodities and products are out of the discussion. We shouldn't be worried and we shouldn't be hyperventilating anymore and leave it to the weapons and the chips manufacturers to be hyperventilating.
Commissioner.
Indeed, in last couple of years, those national security and economic security considerations had been featuring much more prominently in the discussions. Globally speaking, we are seeing that geopolitics is becoming more confrontational, and correspondingly the security considerations are becoming more prominent. And that's something which is happening also in the EU. We have our economic security strategy, but it's not about putting, this much tariff on this or that good. It's then rather about measures on export restrictions or foreign direct investments into the EU, which may pose certain security risks, or we are now assessing whether something would need to be done concerning the outbound investment. So there, tariffs is not really the tool to deal with economic security considerations. And also there, we think that it's important that like-minded democracies work together. We had lots of bilateral engagement with US on this, also trilaterally EU, US, Japan, also within G7. And we think it's important this work also continues, but I would not see so much linkage with tariff discussion.
Dr. Ngozi, would you like to weigh in that?
I think I've weighed in quite a bit. I would hope that I understand, because it's easy to use tariffs, that it's quite attractive as a political tool. But I would hope that on the economic side, we also have a strong analysis of what this means. And so as we use it, perhaps as the gentleman said over there, once the objectives of using this, if it's leverage, as you said, have been achieved, that we could get to a place where this is not something that is excessively used, because the world has worked really hard over time to try to lower tariffs. And this kind of approach has boosted world trade, and every country has benefited, every country. The US has benefited, China, East Asia, the whole, actually, maybe there are poor countries who have not benefited as much. Countries in Africa haven't benefited as much. Their share of world trade has stagnated around 3%. Least developed countries, the poorest, their share has stagnated around 1%. So we need to think about what that means. And they're the least integrated. I think Valdis said it. They said those who are not doing so well are actually the ones whose tariffs are very much higher, and they're not as integrated into the world economy as others who have lower tariffs. So we should learn some lessons about what this means. And that's all I would want to say. But I understand politics. Well, let's let the politics play out, and then we'll see.
Please go ahead.
Just to mention the lessons, let me complete the answer to your question. I really don't think the tariff will bring the manufacturer back to the United States. The lesson is, since yesterday you also shake your hands, we are in the same ground. Great. And you see, it's American and Chinese in line with together. And,
it can be consensus after all.
8 years ago, 2018, so Trump 1.0 launched a 301 against China, right? So in that time, the tariff against Chinese export to US increased from 3.75, which is most favorable nations in the tariff level, gradually jumped to 19.6 today. So it's really 15% tariff increase now. But China still exports around 500 billion goods to US and still have a $350 billion surplus with US, but not very much increase, I have to say, I have to admit, right? It's a market share shrinks. But if you're looking for the US manufacturing share to GDP continue to drop from 12% of GDP drop to today, 10%. It's not easy. I mean, build a manufacturing is not an easy thing. You need many things. Tariff is absolutely not instruments to do that, right? So I really don't think that will work. In classical economics, the tariff only works in very specific conditions. You have your infancy industries, you want them to grow up, you're ready, and who they right, you do tariff, protect this particular sector. When you grow up, you cut your tariff. That's okay, but general tariff will never, ever boost the economy or bring manufacturing back. It is cooperation can help U.S. rebuild manufacturing. As I gave you the first part of the answer, if U.S. and China can work together, I think the Chinese company will be happy to invest in the United States. But tariff will not do it. So in the past 80 years, because tariff, both sides don't work together. U.S. don't have a manufacturing, all right? Continue to stay at low level. So I hope Trump, I believe Trump will understand, can open the door for both countries to work together. And it's good for China, and good for the United States, and good for the whole world. And the U.S. will have a new modern, green manufacturing. I think that would be good. Yeah, thank you.
Well, when it comes to the U.S., we know that Trump's economic advisor says that tariffs would help make the U.S. rich again. If tariffs is not the way to make the U.S. rich again, what are the other options? What are the alternatives? What should the U.S. be looking at as alternative ways to make it rich again? Anyone from over here? So. Could we have the microphone, please?
Hi, I'm the ambassador of Brazil to the WTO. I would say it would be the opposite route. It would be further integration, more dialogue. I think there's a geopolitical issue sort of getting in the way of making America rich again. I think embracing a certain level playing field and a rules-based relationship with the world in both the trade and economic areas, all sectors, I think it would do much more for everyone's economy than going back to post-World War II type or even interwar type traditional tariff wars, let's say. I think that can pull economies back. In fact, it can enhance tensions, and I think it would not be particularly helpful. I think the U.S. was already also a winner. There's a lot of China sort of obsession, but I think the U.S. was a clear winner of the world trade system and the international order as it exists today. You can see that by the per capita income of the United States and the size of its economy. It's still huge. So I would hope that we can find a way to maintain and improve the rules, improve the world order. I think there's an impact of this tariff, using tariff politically. I think there's a negative spillover, which is it really hurts the international rules-based system because it implies that perhaps the commitments that everyone has made at the WTO after so many years of WTO existence, and everybody abides by that, it means that all of a sudden this is no longer important or relevant from a legal standpoint or from a commitment standpoint. So I think that's a bad message. It kind of ruins a little bit the chessboard and leaves country wondering then what is valid, what are the rules, what's the common reference point for everyone to interact. I think that's my concern. Thank you.
Yeah, if I may on this. Well, first of all, I would dare to argue that the US is not poor. If the point was that make it rich again, it's actually rich. And US is having also one of the best growth rates among advanced economies. So on aggregate, things seem to be working actually quite well in the United States. Where there are some issues, they are probably more linked with income inequality, because it's true that income inequality in US is much bigger, like say in EU, and in the most unequal EU member state is still much more equal in terms of incomes than United States. And that's obviously is generating also certain political problems, which Trump may be now trying to solve with tariffs, but focusing on addressing income inequality probably would be most efficient way of addressing those issues.
I just want to say that the U.S. is a leader It's a leader in services trade. It's a leader in innovation. The US is so far out front that, and the US should be proud of this. It's the largest exporter of services in the world. It's the largest innovator. It holds the most patents. 22% of all patents are held. The US businesses earn $136 billion a year in royalty payments from the innovation that they've had. And net about 80 billion. So even after you net out what they have to pay, they still owe more. China is in a deficit in this area. It pays out more in terms of trying to patents and all than it receives. I just want to also put that in context. And, you know, the US has been losing manufacturing jobs, and there's the idea that only manufacturing jobs are good. I understand it. We have to speak to those that are not, you know, because you're accused, let's not be accused of being elitist and try to understand the pains of those working class people who are losing these jobs. And it's true, they have lost jobs. You know, many studies have been done that show that due to China competition, about 2.3, 2.4 million jobs have been lost in the US. But by the same token, manufacturing jobs and services jobs have also been created. So it's not only on the negative side. And there are almost like 2.7 million jobs, almost 3 million created in manufacturing. And in services, another 4 million jobs. And there are good services jobs. So 7 million versus 2.3 or 4 that have been lost. So net, the US has been, trade has helped the US do better. And no one ever talks of these services jobs, but that's where the future lies. The fastest growing segment of trade is digitally delivered services trade. It's growing at 8% per year versus goods trade that is growing at 5.8%, and the US excels. So sometimes I get puzzled about why isn't the US building on what it's so good at, which is innovation, you know, which is, you know, getting people, and not only just innovating, but applying the innovation to make goods. So could we talk about that a little bit? What we need to do is those that are losing out, because manufacturing jobs are moving out, not so much because of trade in some areas, but automation. Technology. Mining is no longer about people digging things from there, except in very poor countries. It's about automation, and so people are losing in West Virginia and that. Could we have a policy of using more resources to retrain and reskill those people so they could actually benefit from where the US is excelling, which is both high-skilled jobs in the AI space and in the innovation space? This is the kind of dialogue I think we ought to be having, not where is the US losing, but the US is gaining much more overall in the world, and no one is talking about it. But I have to say these facts, because these are facts, okay? They're not debatable. The numbers are there. So
the numbers don't lie.
I hope so. No, but I think the US has this advantage that I wish we could talk more about, because we need to build on it for people in the US.
I'd like, though, to stay focused on the discussion we're having today. When we talk about tariffs, it's not just about the US imposing tariffs. Now, we have the likes of Canada, China, Mexico also saying they will reciprocate. They, too, will impose tariffs. I mean, how do you see this playing out? I mean, is this tit for tat? How might this play out in the global economy?
Well, let me say this. Valdis pointed out that we've been there before. We've seen this movie, as I said elsewhere, in the 1930s with the Smoot-Hawley Act.
Could it get worse, though?
And it worsened the Great Depression, made it worse, and then the world came to see that this was not the way to go. So if we do a tit for tat, we're very much saying to our members at the WTO, you have other avenues. Even if a tariff is levied, please keep calm. Don't wake up and without the necessary groundwork, levy your own. If there's 25%, I'll do 40, and so on. And that's why I'm very intent here on not leading us to a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because if business people walk out of here thinking everyone is disobeying the rules, and the ambassador from Brazil just said, the bulk of members are obeying the rules. If they walk out of here thinking that, they'll go home and say to their politicians, hey, listen, you are sitting trying to do the right thing when everybody is doing the wrong thing. Why don't you do the wrong thing too? Then we will have a self-fulfilling prophecy of tit for tat. And we've done the numbers. If we have tit for tat retaliation, whether it's 25%, tariff 60%, and we go to where we were in the 1930s, we're going to see double-digit global GDP losses. Double digit. That's catastrophic. Everyone will pay. Everyone. And the poor countries will pay even more. Second, if we just do not quite tit for tat, but even a version of that, let's say we break into 2 trading blocks and, you know, we're not trading across the world, and we layer in trade policy uncertainty. We've done that work too. We're going to lose 6.4% of real global GDP in the longer term. That's like losing the economy of Japan and Korea combined. $6.75 trillion. That's far from trivial, and that will hurt everyone also. So that's why I'm saying let our members, and they are listening, I want them to listen more. The EU is here, Valdis and I, and President von der Leyen and all. We've been talking about this. Could we use the methodologies? If you think you're being harmed, you as a member are entitled to launch a series of investigations to look at what is this harm, and then to show it. After that, you can request consultation from the economy that is harming you. And then we take it from there. There are processes laid out. Well, I'm encouraged by seeing some investigations being done in the US. I think the executive order we saw is more about investigate, they study that. You know, even the External Revenue Service is investigate how we can say it. So maybe when we do that, we can have a sound basis to decide, or the US rather, not us, you know, how to move forward. I'm not saying that won't result in things we may not like, but at least let's put a sound process to do these things, and other countries, other members to do the same. China, we've been talking about this. EU has been trying to follow this with the investigation. It still resulted in them levying tariffs, but now they're in discussions with China, which are quite difficult. But they're talking, what can we do in order to have a good outcome? Japan went through this. If people remember, it was in the 70s and 80s where Japan went through this story. It was seen as dumping cheap goods and cheating. And Japan, and this went on for quite a while. I remember I was just starting college then, and this was all that was in the news. And Japan entered into discussions with the US to try to find a way out, which resulted in setting up factories in the US, in doing some other things, in a managed approach that worked. So there are methodologies, there are ways, and maybe that's what the new president is looking for, to try and see if he can get a dialogue on some of these issues. At the same time, we're encouraging China to be more transparent and more open with its trade policies and the way it does business, to report those things it's supposed to report to the WTO more, so we have more data on what it is doing. And we received a dump of data recently, which we put in our trade policy report, but we found additional data, which after discussion with China, we were able to publish. And we're pushing them to move in that direction, and that's going. So I think if we work with each other, we can have more transparency, because trust is missing. And that's what's bedeviling trade. If we can restore some of that, then all the discussion about tariffs, after the political part of it, we might have a sensible discussion. Sorry, I don't mean to hog the conversation, but...
Go ahead. We have a microphone, yes.
Since Director General mentioned about Japan, I'm from Japan, so I have to respond. I think we went through this old story.
Yes.
But the auto industry of Japan was not about cheating or dumping. We were much better. But at the time, we understood politics. We could, if left alone, we could have wiped out the U.S. total auto industries. But we understand that was politically unacceptable. So we sort of struck a deal with the U.S. that we will limit the export of vehicles from Japan and the U.S. Many political pressures were put against us, but that led to transplants in Kentucky for Toyota, Honda for Ohio, and they worked very hard to localize. So today, I think many Americans are considering, Kentucky Toyota is part of Kentucky, Hyundai in Ohio as a part of America. So I understand China is having a difficulty, but I understand I'm supportive of free trade policy, but in order to deal with the political reality, we have to find, probably U.S. and China would have to find a win-win solution. And I'm not quite sure if we can be proud of our experience, but now we don't see trade conflict between the U.S. and Japan. Well, we may be imposed with 10% tariff.
Like everybody else.
But it's very different from 20 years ago. Try to have a win-win solution. Try to be as American as possible for the important industries. So that's, I think, the realistic experience of
It's a very good experience to build on. Try to have that dialogue between the two countries. And maybe that's what President Trump is seeking. I don't know, maybe. And then you could come to some negotiated solutions. It's happening in the EU. They're trying to do it now.
Commissioner?
Indeed, as I said also at the beginning, from EU side, we are certainly open for engagement with US and for constructive dialogue and for seeking a good way forward.
Any input? Okay.
Since we've been talking about the U.S. only, since we have an EU commissioner, let me allow me to raise this point. CBAM. I know it is not considered to be tariff, but it has a de facto tariff impact. I support the goal of CBAM, but now it has the proliferation problem. It started with 5 products, steel and so on, but now the downstream products of steel are now covered by CBAM, including screws and bolts. I'm not quite sure to what extent screws and bolts affect our planet. Number 2, I was in many sessions with my friends from Africa, trade and energy, and I heard so many concerns about what CBAM would impact the growth of the developing economies. And I heard from them, not from Japan, that when they talk about just transition, it's not just access to power. To fulfill their desire to growth, and trade is the best means for growth. It's not aid. So hopefully this balance between trade and legitimate climate change policy could be discussed, and also the CBAM impact on developing countries, how it would be addressed, including what do you do with the revenue of CBAM, which is not being made clear. So once again, climate change policy, trade policy, and development policy, these 3 would have to be discussed.
Yeah, if I may, to say a couple of words on CBAM. When we were designing CBAM, we were very careful to make sure that it is within the rules of the World Trade Organization. So the starting point is that we have our energy-intensive industries, and so far, to avoid so-called carbon leakage, we were exempting them from carbon pricing, from our emission trading system. Now, with the European Green Deal, we started to put carbon price on our energy-intensive industries. So the question is, how do we deal with the risk of carbon leakage that then those energy-intensive industries, steel, cement, fertilizers, so on, that they go just across the border and then those goods are imported into the EU. So what we are saying, we are putting the same price of carbon, which we are putting on our own producers, on importers. So therefore, it's not price distortive. And we are very clear it's an environmental measure. So if a third country is putting the price of carbon on its own production, we are subtracting it. So therefore, it's indeed something which can be seen more as a consumption tax. So the end result will not change the competitive position of EU producers vis-à-vis foreign producers. The end result will make certain goods more costly in the EU market. But okay, that was a decision we have, in a sense, taken and accepted. But I must insist that this is not a trade distortive measure.
Maybe you can come in a little bit. We've been talking to the EU about this because the developing countries at the WTO see the CBAM as a measure of trade protectionism. And as the gentleman said, they are very upset about it. And the EU is trying to meet its climate goals, but this instrument is seen by others as preventing them from accessing EU markets. We actually brought the Director General who designed CBAM from the EU to come to the WTO for half a day to respond to members' issues. And it's not just poor countries, they're emerging market countries, and even at the margin, developed countries who are also concerned about this. But I think there are a few issues that need to be known. It's a carbon tax from the EU. Many developing countries don't have their own. So when they're talking to the EU and the EU says this is $100 per ton of CO2 emissions and therefore your thing is coming, they don't have any measure with which to discuss. Valdis just said we deduct their own prices that have been internalized, but many of them don't have a carbon price. So how do we develop this so that they can have a point of discussion with the EU? Second, many of the poor countries are saying, we didn't cause this climate change problem. We didn't. Historically, you guys developed in the developed countries, emitted and brought our planet to where it is. And now you want me at this time to pay the same tax as you? I'm not going to accept that. So we have a bit of a problem because many countries are taking historical dimensions. Now, this is a point of dichotomy and discussion at the WTO. There are developed countries who don't want that to come in because they say the WTO is not the UNFCCC, this is not the forum. But part of the protectionist argument, I have to be very clear, from developing countries is that this is a problem for them because they are being asked to pay now for wrongs that were done by others in the past. So we have to find a way to square this circle. I think developing countries ought to have a carbon tax. And we have a task force at the WTO of multilateral organizations like IMF, World Bank, UNCTAD. We are coordinating OECD to try and come up with a framework. It would have differential prices. But then we also need to coordinate for this acceptance that if a developing countries internalizes the prices, what happens to the difference? And have a sensible dialogue instead of a dialogue of the deaf. You did this to me, I didn't do this. That's not taking us anywhere. This is what we are now striving to work towards. But we've got to listen to the developing countries, their viewpoints that, you know, we cannot just go only on today's. We have to also think of our culpability or not for the past. I'm just laying out, I'm not taking one side or the other. I'm just laying out the arguments of my members and how we need to act to bridge that divide.
Please, can we have the microphone?
Tariffs are very easy to use. Another instrument that is increasingly being used to spur local production and local manufacturing is global government procurement. The US government has, in the first Trump administration, tried to get out of the government procurement agreement. But we see by America, by China, by India, by Indonesia, the larger markets are asking companies to, if you want to participate in public procurement, you need to make that stuff in our country. That, as a consequence, smaller countries, smaller markets, but also developing countries will miss out because we have to already put the factory in China, or we must put it in India. We can't put it in your country, even if you're more interesting. The EU doesn't do this, but increasingly the countries like the ones I mentioned are increasing their protectionism and using, instead of tariffs, local procurement rules. Are you worried about local procurement rules from a WTO perspective as being more damaging than tariffs?
Indonesia is doing the same, I think.
Indonesia is asking for value addition to its critical minerals. It's slightly different. We have a government procurement agreement with 49 members. It's a plurilateral agreement. And government procurement is very powerful. It's a $13 trillion business. And we see about $1.7 trillion in benefits through this agreement. So it's a good one. It offers more transparency. And I think it ought to be used it could be used in different ways that could be beneficial. Ways that would exclude and block other countries from benefiting, I think that's not what the intention was. as a lot of these policies. But I think we can be sensible. One way the government procurement agreement can be used sensibly is for environmental issues. You can ask that for your procurement, you buy green, in order to help the world lower carbon emissions. And with these kinds of trillions, that can give you a big push in trying to reach your climate goals. I believe that's an appropriate use of that instrument. Other uses, I would say, let's back off. Now, in terms of requiring companies to add value, I would say to private sector and companies, two things. One, we have seen that in certain sectors of the world's economy, there's overdependence. Trade is supposed to be about interdependence, not overdependence. So if we concentrate supply chains too much in one part of the world, or manufacturing of a certain product in one country, it does not build global resilience. We need to decentralize and deconcentrate supply chains for certain products that are too concentrated, or certain supply chains. That's where I would differ slightly and say we saw in the pandemic what overdependence means. 10 countries exporting 80% of the world's vaccines, and the rest could not get it, and people were dying. So should we look at those critical minerals? There's a concentration, 70% processing in China. There may be historical reasons for that. 36% of critical minerals, but there's a supply elsewhere in the world. So there are some sectors where I think semiconductors, we need to build resilience by deconcentrating, not just to big countries. There are also others that have the capacity to have these supply chains. So let me stop there. So I believe in a certain amount of, at the WTO, we have a term for it, re-globalization. Let's decentralize, deconcentrate, bring others into the world trade by integrating.
Yeah, well, on this government procurement question, indeed, EU is part of the government procurement agreement, so correspondingly we keep our government procurement market open. But it's true that we see increasingly different barriers to procurement, which creates also certain reactions in the EU. Like in recent years, we have created what we call international procurement instrument, meaning that if a third country is keeping in certain sector its government procurement market close to the European producers, we may engage in discussions with this country, but in absence of solution, we close our market to that country's producers as well. To give a concrete example, we recently launched this international procurement instrument case against China in the area of medical devices, where we keep our market open, but our producers are not able to get into this Chinese markets, not even the ones who are producing in China, let alone the ones who would be delivering from Europe. So it's certain rebalancing. Again, it's not an ideal solution, but as you see that indeed more and more countries are using this kind of Buy American style provisions. As a EU, we also need to see what to do, and this is a measured response which we have designed. But it must also be said that it's also driving this debate in the EU, and also in the EU there are forces which say, yeah, but we also should have Buy European, why don't we do it? So.
Just microphone over there, just one more.
Thank you for a great session, and thanks to the Director General for her outstanding service. I have 2 points. First, I think the Japan analogy regarding the China-US relationship, unfortunately, there is a military strategic component to that relationship and that dialogue these days that did not occur in the 70s when the US was in discussions with Japan. I want to pick up, secondly, on one thing that the Director General said. The United States should be more self-confident about its ability to out-innovate China. But let me say this as well, with Mr. Zhu Min behind me. China should be more confident about its ability to compete with the United States without all of the non-tariff barriers, unfair trading practices, patent theft, and other violations that have characterized Chinese economy over the last 15 to 20 years. There is a crisis of confidence in both these countries. Both can overcome it. It's tough, but I think actually with the benefit of the business community's support for President Trump, that I think this time next year I'm very optimistic that we will have progress in terms of restoration of confidence in the US and in China, but both have to play.
In the meantime, do not hyperventilate. On that note,
Chill.
Take the chill pill. Dr. Ngozi, thank you so much for joining us today.